Welcome to I Could Talk to You All Day. I'm Lauren Lefkowitz, recovering workaholic, perfectionist, and people pleaser.
And I'm John Spears, emerging from playing small, getting caught up in the inertia of life, and always being on.
I Could Talk to You All Day is a show for executives and emerging leaders. This is not just another leadership podcast. We're here to talk about what it means to be a leader while also being human.
So join us for raw, vulnerable, and probably pretty funny conversations about shifting from surviving at work and home to thriving in the life you've always wanted. Let's get the conversation started. Hi.
Hey, John.
Hey, how you doing?
We're here.
We are here. We live to tell another day. We're back for another episode of I Could Talk to You All Day.
We are. We're almost halfway to the point of the average podcast lasting.
Really? Is that?
Yeah.
Is that
seven episodes is the average podcast. This is 2. We're doing it.
Well, we're not done yet. So we're like in the beginning of 2. We'll see like how far we get with this one.
Right. We might quit in the middle.
Maybe. I mean, that's not going to happen.
That's probably not going to happen.
We've already received some pretty, I think, incredible feedback of people resonating with what we were talking about. You know, we came to this podcast with the intention of being real and vulnerable and raw. And we wanted people to have an experience of just having a conversation with us. And that is exactly the kind of feedback that we're getting. And I'm just pumped that we're making that happen, that it's happening and people are having that experience.
I am so excited about that. Every time I get a piece of feedback that it feels like our listeners are in the conversation with us, that it feels like we're saying things out loud that people don't say out loud, I get more and more excited about our future episodes because you and I already have a bunch of topics. We've gotten topic suggestions from people, and I think the topic suggestions are just going to keep coming in. Like even in the comments we've gotten, I've seen topics ready for us.
Totally.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to be able to continue to impact people and continue to engage people and show them how freaking normal it is to not feel normal.
Yeah. I mean, I'm mainly looking forward to telling embarrassing stories of myself.
Sure. Yeah, me too. There are all of these secret stories that we have that when you say one of them out loud, and sometimes when I get vulnerable, my heart still pounds because I think this is the story that's going to be the time where everybody looks at me and says, "Oh, you're weird." That doesn't happen. Every time I say I did this or this happened to me or this boss didn't like me, there's somebody else who has had that experience. And I know we talked about that at the end of our last episode, but I think it's worth repeating because we all feel like there's something wrong with us. We all feel like we're doing it wrong, like we're being judged, and like we're the only one this particular situation has ever happened to. And even though we've all had unique actual experiences, the summary and the theme of these experiences are all really similar.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
You talked about stories, and that really is a helpful segue into what we're talking about today, which is the distinction between fact and interpretation. Why don't you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I love this topic because I am a great internal storyteller.
Me too. Totally.
I'm so skilled at that. I can look at a situation and skew it in such a way that everything that might go wrong or might be going wrong or might have gone wrong is my fault, my responsibility, and like I'm the center of the universe of the story. And so we're going to use interpretation and story kind of interchangeably as we talk tonight, but we have 2 different ways of looking at things. We can look at just the facts, which aren't always clear, but we don't typically. We look at how our eyes and our brains and hearts view the situation and who we already are and what we already know about ourselves and all of our self-defense mechanisms, all that come up as we're interpreting how things are happening to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I like to think of facts as what is a news reporter reporting on? This thing happened and that happened. It's basically just the facts. I also think back to when I was in middle school science and like, what are the things that are happening in the science experiment? There's no interpretation. There's no, other steps of the scientific method. It's like what I walked into a room and someone said X to me, period. Not someone said X to me in a certain tone or anything like that, but like simply the facts. And then there's interpretation. And as you said, we are really, really good at interpretation. I do not have a very vivid imagination, but when it comes to stuff happening in my life and the stories I tell myself, man, my imagination is spectacular.
I'm going to make a guess and say it's never, wow, everybody in this room admires me. Right. Nobody in this room thinks they could do it better than me, right? We don't skew towards the interpretation of I'm amazing. We skew to the interpretation of I am doing this wrong. I'm not good enough.
Right. Yeah. I skew to catastrophizing a situation, that it is interpreted in like the worst possible way. My inner saboteur comes out and all of the patterns of the past or past experiences or fears that I've had feed into the lens through which I'm viewing the fact to make it some really monster-filled story that's going to destroy me and be like the end of my life.
And my go-to is to imagine that everybody thinks I've broken everything and I need to fix it right now. And I will not be able to fix it fast enough. And so if you think about your own interpretation as you're listening to this, what is your default? Think about what your default is when something is going on that's stressing you out. Do you jump to one of the things John or I said, or do you have your own version of catastrophe or not good enough or being overly responsible for things? It's such an interesting thing to look at for yourself and see what's your go-to sabotage effort.
Totally. Yeah, they might look differently. The story might have a different tone. The story might have a different set of pictures or outcomes, but it's often not a positive one. It's often not an empowering one that gives us hope and like pushes us forward. It's often one that makes us feel small or insignificant or traps us back into previous patterns of behavior or ways of thinking that we've experienced before. So, I think, Lauren, we all have this challenge at times between distinguishing between fact and interpretation. I think we've gotten a lot better at it since we've been really curious and have been mindful and intentional about being in experiences and being curious about what we're hearing and why we're hearing it, and doing a better job of pushing the interpretation to the side and just looking at the facts. But I'm curious from your experience, are there times when making the distinction between fact and fiction is more challenging than other times?
Yes. For me, there are 3 distinct kinds of situations where I will have a tendency to make up a story, to create an interpretation that is not based on fact. One of those is that I always set really high expectations for myself. That's the perfectionist, workaholic, people pleaser in me. And I set expectations that in reality, if we look at the facts, if we interviewed people and asked them what their expectations were, I would not actually be expected to do what my brain is telling me I'm expected to do. Mm-hmm. And so when I set really high expectations for myself and I can't meet them because no human could, I am making up the story of the person I'm serving, the group of clients, the friend, the family member, and imagining that they are also thinking I'm not doing a good enough job. My second is when I'm not feeling well. And John, and I've talked about it a lot on social media, I have been living with chronic illness for most of my adult life. And what that did for me in my corporate life was it made me work twice as hard because I didn't want anyone to know I was sick. And I imagined that if I told them I was sick, they would sort of pour Lauren the situation and go easier on me, not have high expectations and imagine I couldn't do the job. So that is a huge story that just lives on with me. And when I'm not feeling well, when I have a flare up of something, or I'm just not having a great health day, I imagine that whatever I'm supposed to be doing is not happening and I'm disappointing everybody around me. And then my third one is when I'm not clear on what the other person expects of me, I will make up what they expect of me. So I've gotten really good at clarity and gaining an agreement, getting things on paper in a business relationship, and making sure that I know where we are, keeping people informed. I've always been good at updates. But if I'm not 100% sure what another person is expecting of me, then I'm thinking whatever I'm doing is not enough, right? So for me, it all comes down to not enough, right? All of my three sort of triggers all end in I'm not good enough, I'm not strong enough, smart enough, impactful enough. And if I look at the facts, I'm a successful adult person with many jobs.
Yeah.
And people trust me to do the work. And I deliver on it. And so if I'm able to look at the fact side of things, and I'm able to address, and we'll talk more about this later, I think, if I'm able to address what these saboteurs are for me, then my end result is I'm not feeling this way. The people I'm serving who already weren't feeling this way aren't feeling this way. And I don't have any stories to make up.
Right.
What about for you, John?
Lauren, for me, I have a slightly different sort of thread that goes through my interpretation. And that is, I'm not worthy. I'm not deserving. So it's a little bit like you're not enough, you're not good enough, but it's a slightly different of like, you don't deserve to be here kind of a thing. And again, I think this goes back to some part of my childhood, but the three really clear times when I have a more difficult time making this distinction between fact and interpretation are as follows. The first is when I'm doing something new. I recently took on a full-time role as a COO. I was doing the acting role for about a year. And it's really funny, when I got the permanent role, something shifted. Nothing really shifted, but in my brain, something shifted. It was new. It was more real for some reason. And I remember the first few weeks in that new role, I really struggled with this distinction. I really made a lot of stories up about how other people were seeing me or viewing me or my work or how it was showing up. So that's just really interesting that when I'm doing something new, I am more susceptible to having a difficult time around the distinction between fact and interpretation, fact stories that I'm making up in my head. The second, which is pretty similar to your number two, is when I'm really tired or stressed, when I'm not taking care of myself, basically, when there isn't well-being in my life, when I'm not eating well or sleeping well or getting enough water or exercise or outside time, I tend to really struggle generally with this area and making that distinction. And the last is when I really, really care about something, or when something's really, really important to me. Enter in relationships or projects that I'm working on that I really care about, that I feel very invested in. Those are also times when I can struggle with hearing what people are saying, or taking what people are saying and interpreting it to mean something completely different, or taking a look from someone, or the fact that someone didn't stop by to say hi to me in an office or whatever, to mean something that it was never intended to mean.
As you are saying that, I was thinking, gosh, we should give a really simple example of how we make up a story. And a look or a tone that doesn't have anything to do with us, from someone in the office or someone we pass by in the neighborhood who we know, or a partner or friend, is so open to interpretation. And the truth is, we're all pretty self-involved.
Yeah.
And it's almost never about us. And I always think of the example you used of you pass by somebody in the office, you say hi, they don't say hi back. And in your head, what do I owe him? What am I late on for him? What did I give him that he's disappointed in? Why is he angry at me? And he's probably thinking, I haven't seen John in a while because he didn't even notice you as you were walking by and saying hi.
Yeah. I also have an example. I have a almost 13-year-old daughter. For those of you who have almost 13-year-old daughters or middle school girls or teenage girls, it's a fun time. It's been a blast. But there are times when like my daughter just isn't into me. She's like not into wanting to hang out. And I really love this kid so much. And I want to spend as much time as I can with her. And so when she isn't receptive to me wanting to do something or to talking, I can often get really hurt by that. I can often be sad that she's not wanting that and make it mean something way more than it is. The story I tell myself is I'm not a good dad. I'm not loving her the right way. She doesn't want anything to do with me. And the reality is that she's just a 13-year-old girl who wants to be with her friends, who needs alone time. And if I am not careful, I can often spiral down to that really dark place of there's something wrong with me. I'm totally messing up, as opposed to she's a 13-year-old kid. She just doesn't want to hang out with you. It doesn't mean anything that you're making it mean, right? And so I have a million other stories, particularly in relationships that I have, that I can often just go in that direction, and it can be really, really unproductive and self-sabotaging and really be counterproductive to the thing that I'm actually looking for in my relationships, in the work that I'm doing.
When I think of how I self-sabotage in stories or in interpretations, is that the people pleaser in me overcompensates so hard preemptively. So I will go above and beyond and do things nobody expects of me in friendships, in work, and realize afterwards that nobody asked me for all of this help.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I come across as invasive. And nobody to date has said, don't help me. And also, I've realized as I've learned to set boundaries that nobody is saying you're less of a good friend.
Mm-hmm.
You're less effective as a leader. You're less effective as a coach. And that's been really eye-opening for me, that the damage we can do to ourselves in creating an interpretation that doesn't exist can take our time, our energy, our heart, and really mess with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think as you were speaking, I realized two things. One is that it not only impacts our mindset, how we feel, how we show up, how we are in the world. We can often take action and do things that are not in our best interest, that don't serve us. So you talked about people pleasing and going over it. I can totally see areas in my life when if I'm projecting something, if I'm telling myself a story that this person doesn't think I'm good enough, I can totally ramp up the I deserve to be here, proving performance kind of mentality. And that's just not how I want to be. It's not who I am. And it actually doesn't serve me and is not authentic to who I want to be in the world. So, Lauren, we have these patterns around fact and interpretation. Okay, so now what? What do we do? What can we do to shift the pattern, to change the pattern, to respond in a different way?
Oh, that is a great question. Now what? For me, a lot of my work has been in really stopping and thinking about what I'm actually being asked for, what I've actually promised, and trying to stick with that. Not in a way that makes me rigid or inflexible, but in a way that I'm serving the way I know best how to, and the way that's going to serve whoever I'm serving the best way. without killing myself to do it. And sometimes I will notice myself stressing out about something I've promised to deliver that felt realistic and now it doesn't. And that goes back to this high expectations of myself piece of fact versus interpretation. And I will stop and ask myself, is this my responsibility? Have I committed to this? Or am I up leveling where nobody's asking me to up level? One tool that I use for myself and I use with clients is a responsibility list. And on one column, you write my responsibility. And on the other column, you write not my responsibility. And as you're doing things, notice and mark down just shorthand so you can know for yourself, this thing I'm doing right now, I'm going to continue doing, but it's not my responsibility. Or this thing I'm doing now is my responsibility. It goes on the my responsibility list. And what I've learned for myself is when I'm spinning out and spiraling about trying to be the best at something that nobody's expecting from me, I have a lot of things on the not my responsibility list. And then I can stop myself from doing things that nobody's asking me to do.
Right.
How about you, John? What do you find is good for you to break these patterns?
Yeah, I think I have 4 things that often help me come back to myself and come back to reality and what's actually happening in my life and in the context of the situation. The first is slowing down. I am someone who thinks fast, talks fast, is go, 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 always wants to be in motion. And I found that by slowing down a little bit, I'm able to become less reactive and more responsive to the situation. And so instead of this knee-jerk reaction, this automatically catastrophizing, automatic interpretation, I'm able to kind of just sit with it for a second and not spiral. So slowing down in general is really helpful. In fact, I have a sticky note on my monitor that says slow down, because I find that when I'm slowing down, not just in this area of life, but in all areas of life, I'm just so much more present to what's actually happening and not so quick to jump to a conclusion or to an interpretation that's not true. The second is to breathe. I'm someone who has big emotions and feels things in my body, and the breath and breathing can often either help me to relax my body, or if I'm not breathing, it can kind of really reinforce that anxious cycle. So breathing and taking some deep breaths and really getting that energy flowing in my body is really helpful. The third thing is to actually write down what are the facts on a sheet of paper. I often have my journal by me. So I'll say, I'm in this meeting and this colleague said this. These are the words they said. And then kind of like your responsibility list, on one column, I'll do what they said. And the next column, I'll do what is my interpretation of that. So it gets really clear about what the facts are and the story I'm telling myself about that. And then the fourth thing that I do, and this is really helpful when I'm having a conversation with someone and I'm spinning out an interpretation, is to repeat back to someone to say, I heard you say X. These are the words that you said, but the story that I'm telling myself is X. One, that helps me to be really vulnerable in a conversation with someone that I care about. I'm likely not doing this with a stranger on the street, but if I'm with a colleague or with a loved one or someone I really care about and want to deepen a relationship, me being able to distinguish to them what I'm hearing them say and what I'm telling myself about what they said is a really helpful exercise, like I said, to be vulnerable, but also to give them insight into some of the patterns and ways of thinking, that I have in my own life.
I love what you said about breathing. I loved all of what you said, but I especially loved what you said about breathing, because I am a person who legitimately forgets to breathe.
Me too. Totally.
I will be stressed and sitting and doing something, and I will go because I will realize that I've been holding my breath. And that's not an intentional deep breath. That's me realizing I'm going to turn blue if I don't start breathing again. And I can recognize that my shoulders are up at my ears, that I'm not working effectively because the intensity is at the wrong level for whatever I'm doing. There's no level of intensity that should be in a way that you forget to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually no way to forget to breathe. Like your body's clearly doing it on its own. So there's a subconscious, or I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but there's a subconscious like intentionality in my body that is like, it's too stressful, don't even breathe.
Mm-hmm.
And I've learned to notice that if my breath is doing that, I have to step away.
Yeah.
I've got to take a break. And I notice that when I book myself on days back to back, which I don't do often anymore, but we all sometimes still fall into the same traps, no matter how much work we've done. And I have very occasionally canceled a meeting on a day when I have realized I've just made myself go back to back. And the story that I make up is that whoever I'm canceling on, I have to choose carefully who I'm canceling on.
Mm-hmm.
And my cancel is like, can we move to tomorrow? It's not, I won't be able to ever speak to you.
Yeah.
But in my head, I'm making up a story about who I'm willing to disappoint or make angry at me. And it's the same every time. Oh, sure, I can reschedule.
Right.
And I love to talk about that and think about that because it's such an everyday thing. We've talked about some of the stories that we make up that are real little, like saying hi to someone. And then some of the stories we've made up that feel really big. And there are stories and interpretations throughout the middle.
Mm-hmm.
We do it all day long. We're stimulated all day long by what's going around us, and we're interpreting all day long. And it's so important to take the opportunity to stop, like you said, and think and consider, why am I stressed about this? Why am I having feelings about this? Why am I worried that this person is going to be angry or disappointed, or that this thing is going to turn into a catastrophe? And sometimes just stopping gets you out of the cycle of worry.
I think that's so important. I think it's particularly important to recognize how powerful our bodies are in indicating where we are, kind of where our mental state is, where we are in terms of alertness to things. To your point, I really resonated with your stories that I've been in an experience where my body just is like super tight. My shoulders are tight. I'm breathing shallow in a shallow way. And if I don't address that, if I don't say, okay, John, what's happening here? Why is this happening with something? Did you say something? Did someone say something? It could spiral, and the way your body feels impacts the way you sort of your mental state and sort of how alert you are and decision-making. And so being able to take a breath, slow down, recognize, and take cues from our body is so important in being able to show up in the way we want to show up as leaders, as friends, as parents, as partners, as family members. And it just could be really helpful in making that choice and being able to make that distinction between fact and interpretation.
Yes. It's about paying attention to it.
Yeah.
We spend a lot of time automatically going through our days and not allowing ourselves to even think about all the stories we're making up, all the interpretations we're creating until we get into bed.
Mm-hmm.
And then our pillow is like, oh, hey, I'm glad you're here. We've got a lot to think about. Come lie down. And I noticed that if I spend more time intentionally during the day, and if I create time for that, which I don't always do, I have an easier time going to sleep at night.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have all of these thoughts of what if I mess this up? What if I messed that up? What if I've disappointed this person?
Right. Because if you're carrying all of those stories with you throughout the day, that is a lot of baggage. That is a heavy bag to carry. And it just compounds experience after experience after experience until by the end of the day, you're just completely exhausted. I mean, have you had that experience where you've had a really hard day and it's been challenging because of the stories you've said? I mean, like, that is just a lot of weight to carry, and it's a lot of space to occupy in your brain. And if we aren't able to release that and to move those thoughts out of our minds and out of our bodies, they're just going to kind of like, it's going to get in the way of you being able to show up how you want to show up, you being a powerful leader, you showing up authentically and making the kind of impact that you want to make in your community, in your organization, in the world.
Yeah. When I was working my way down from 80-hour work weeks, I was working with my coach, and I would just carve out a little time for myself every week. And it took me a long time, but I got down to 60 hours a week, which still sounds like a lot. Just to be clear, I don't work like that anymore. But as I was working my way down, I was making up a story that people were going to think I was lazy.
Mm-hmm.
And John, lazy is my deep, dark fear. That is at my core. My fear is that people will think I'm lazy. There is absolutely no evidence to support that. But my core fear is that people will think I'm lazy. And I was waiting for somebody to call me out on working fewer than 80 hours a week, which nobody else was working, by the way. And one day, somebody emailed me a question, and I'd been really practicing the my responsibility, not my responsibility. And I read this email and I said, that doesn't belong to me. That belongs to Joey. I don't know anybody named Joey, but that's the name I use for an example person. I don't want to call anybody out by name here. I responded to the person and I said, oh, this actually belongs to Joey. So if you go to him, he'll answer your question. And the response I got was, isn't this part of your job? There was no tone in the email. And even now I have trouble saying it without any energy. There's still a little part of me that wonders, is it part of my job? It was like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And I responded, I waited, I paused, I breathed. I was making up a story that this person was accusing me of not doing my job.
Right. Yeah, I can see that.
And I responded, it's actually not. I know I've helped you with this before, but I think I've actually stepped on Joey's toes doing that. So he's your best bet. And I sat at my computer refreshing my email, waiting for this person to respond, thinking I was going to have to go down the hall and have a conversation with this person to take the level of energy down around it. And the response I got was, cool, thanks.
I mean, I think that story just shows how much wasted energy we spend on these kinds of interpretations and making these stories up, catastrophizing, whatever you're doing, whatever way your mind works around story. It's so much energy. I mean, it's exhausting. It is. I'm like exhausted hearing your story.
Yes. And the person who emailed me, I'm making up another story, didn't have any energy around it.
Right.
Was just trying to get the thing done.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent all of this time and energy, including as I had all of this work around me, refreshing my email screen until I got an answer that was satisfying enough to take the energy out of it for me.
Cool, thanks.
Cool, thanks.
Well, Lauren, I could talk to you all day about this, as you know, but we got to wrap up the show. Any final thoughts for our community?
Yeah, I think there is so much opportunity for us, first of all, to all recognize ourselves in these stories. The stories that I'm telling, the stories that you're telling today are not jaw-dropping. They feel like they are. We make something of them. And we make them feel really big and shameful. And similar to our last show, I just want everybody to know that they're normal.
Mm-hmm.
It's not weird to worry that you're disappointing people. It's not weird to imagine that everything's going to be a catastrophe. It's not weird to stop breathing in the middle of your work and realize you haven't taken a deep breath in minutes. It is hard, though. It makes your life harder to keep telling yourself stories, to keep creating interpretations. So I think the key is to really listen to yourself. And if you hear yourself creating a story, if you hear yourself interpreting something without knowing that it's actually true, give yourself the opportunity to stop, consider, breathe, and then think about what you want to do next. And give yourself the grace to recognize that there's another way. There are a lot of other ways, and you don't have to live in these stories forever.
This is totally normal, but there is another way to be. There's another way to use your energy, to spend your time. And that way is full of more freedom, more flatness in terms of energy, less chaos, less drama, less mental energy. And it takes making a choice. It just takes making a choice. And it actually gets me what I want in life, which is deeper connection with people, greater impact, using my energy in a way that is productive and gets me closer to the way I want to live and to the goals that I have for my life. And so I love this idea. Hey, it's normal. We all do it, but there's a different way. And you can choose that different way. Lauren, as always, it's so good talking today. To our folks listening and to our community, so glad you can join us. We're so glad you joined us today. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at I Could Talk to You All Day and tell your friends and colleagues about us.